All righty. Well, everyone, welcome to the end meeting of the Senior Run Club for this semester. I don't actually know what meeting it is. How's everyone doing? I apologize for missing last week. What? It's all my fault. Yeah, no, I got the vaccine. I didn't expect it to kick my ass, but it did. So I'm sorry about that. Hopefully it didn't cause undue burden on anything. But I'm back here. We are only 3 days removed from the beginning of Thanksgiving break. How does everyone feel about that? Hopefully you guys can relax during that time. If you, or at the very least, you guys get caught up on work. I understand how a lot of people are, we're behind, but hopefully you guys can get caught up before the crunch time between now and finals. I'm pulling for you guys. The big storyline for this meeting is that we're going to officially start club elections. Now, what that means is kind of weird. The way we do club elections here, it's kind of outlined in our bylaws here. Basically, we announce elections a week before we actually start them, and so we just kind of consider it to start. This is just the formal announcement to tell you guys that elections are starting. In our next meeting, which will be the week after Thanksgiving, week 14, we're going to accept nominations for the club chair positions. And then on week 15, we will accept more nominations at the beginning of the club, and then we'll vote on those chairs. That'll be the last meeting of the semester, and that's the week before finals. All the club positions are going to be open, so you can run for anything. You can also run for multiple positions, that's totally fine. And then of course we will vote on that week 15. So yeah, if you guys are interested in having a club position, I've talked to a few of you already about it. But yeah, definitely come to the next couple of meetings so we can get that squared away for you guys. Just a kind of summary of what's open. We have president, vice president, secretary, and treasurer. Presidents is what I do basically, lead the meetings, make sure that there's stuff for the meetings every week, that kind of thing. Vice president kind of fills in for the president whenever he can, kind of takes on some of the responsibility of president. Then you have secretary, which sends out the emails, takes notes about each club meeting, a couple other things as well, and then the treasurer, which handles the accounts and the money for the club. Basically, all the positions are pretty low stress, not a lot of work involved. It's mainly just making sure you're able to come to most meetings is the biggest responsibility for them. I recommend that you guys do it for the sake of your resume. It's a real thing that people love, that employers love to see that you were involved in organizations beyond school, because that's one of the ways that you can separate yourself from just someone who graduated with a degree. If you guys have any questions about any of the chair positions or anything like that, be sure to let me know. I can talk to you guys like after club, for example, that'd be totally fine. Oh, the other thing, additionally, we have, in addition to the club e-board positions, we also have chair positions, which are kind of like e-board positions, but like even less responsibility. Some of the ones include the outreach chair, which looks to find any opportunities for the club to like speak at events or that kind of thing. We have the activities chair, which looks for activities you might want to do. I know Brandon is in the webmaster role, and so he's kind of maintaining our website. We also have a med ed role, which is kind of split by Anthony and a couple other people, just educating about meteorology. So if you guys are interested in any of those positions, you would also have to let me know. There's no elections for those. Those are just kind of a first come, first served thing if you guys are interested in that. Are there any questions about any of those? All right. So yeah, that process will start the week after next, which will be our next meeting, week 14. Next, I kind of wanted to get into this GIS presentation that I've been putting together for a while. This is going to be kind of a little off the cuff presentation. I mainly wanted to show you guys kind of what GIS is capable of. How do I minimize this? There we go. I've talked to you guys a lot about what GIS is capable of and why I think you should consider studying it, and I really do, but I haven't actually shown you guys things that I've done personally, and I think that might help you guys to kind of cement what GIS will do for you if you do decide to study it. As I've stated before, GIS has a vast influence in a ton of different fields. Basically anything that has maps, any field that has maps or uses spatial data of any kind, GIS is a big part of it. And so I kind of want to outline 3 main roles that I use GIS for on a daily basis. I do use it on a daily basis because I work at the GIS Center. I use GIS for making maps. Sometimes it's literally about, just looking at where things are located and displaying that information in a way that people can understand. I also use GIS for performing spatial analysis. When knowing where things are isn't enough, you can kind of use spatial data to draw conclusions about the world that aren't otherwise obvious. And you can use GIS for supporting non-GIS like sort of things. That's like by far the biggest category. Oftentimes, if you ever get a job in GIS, your role isn't just going to be doing GIS. That's not really what it is. Really what you're doing is you're using GIS to support things that need GIS but aren't necessarily directly concerned with it. For example, we at the GIS Center maintain a database for the utilities of the city of Macomb. Of course, those people over there, they don't really care about the GIS database. They just want to be able to look at a map and see where the sewer pipes are so that they can fix whatever leak is there. They don't care about the GIS, but we're there to support them so that they're able to do that. That's the kind of thing that I'm talking about. So the first examples that I'm just going to give is maps, just maps that I've made and kind of the thought process behind some of them. You can break maps into a couple of different camps. The main distinction that I'm going to make here is between a reference map versus thematic maps. A reference map is literally just a map that tells you where stuff is. It literally is that simple. And I've got a couple of examples that I wanted to show you guys. I just had this on the screen, but this is a map that I made of Fulton County. It's the county directly to our east in McDonough County. This is literally just a road map along with a couple other things. And it just tells you, where stuff is. It's got major highways labeled, all the towns labeled. The imagined purpose of this map is that, you're driving through Fulton County, you might want to know where a couple of things are. You just pick this up as like a pamphlet or something. It really is that easy. This is the most basic thing a map can be, which isn't to say that it's an easy map to make. This was actually, I did this for a project, and this was probably the most time-consuming map for me to make, just given, trying to consider what would go on the map versus not on the map based on its imagined purpose, and trying to get all the symbologies right. But this is the kind of thing that you would do with a reference map. It just tells you where things are. Let me get out of that. Here's another example of a reference map I made. This map details the paths and intensities of the two most expensive hurricanes that have hit the US, at least as of I made this map. I'm sure there will be some that surpass them eventually. Anthony, I think you probably made this for the class as well. Yep. But yeah, this is, it just details the paths and intensities of Hurricanes Harvey and Katrina. I like this map for a couple of reasons. First of all, it kind of utilizes a symbolizing technique called graduated symbol. We use that here in these intensity drawings where they kind of scale depending on how intense they are. I think that's a good way to demonstrate that information. More importantly, though, it also kind of incorporates something that's important when you do GIS. Is oftentimes we're not only concerned about the map and about what goes where, we're also concerned about auxiliary information or additional information that kind of gives context to what we're mapping. So for example, down here, we also have information about the impacts of the hurricane, when they happened, any fatalities, damage in, expected or reported damage, that kind of thing. This kind of information helps to support what is being mapped. And so it makes the map more powerful in that regard. This next map is kind of like the holy grail of what you could do with a reference map. Anthony, I'm sure, has also been working on a map like this for cartography. If it ever loads, will it load? There it is. This is a big map. But yeah, this is the map that details all the bombing missions of the Vietnam War. We also have a similar map standing outside because it is a great indication of how detailed a map can be. But yeah, this map literally details bombing missions across the Vietnam War. Now, what's interesting about this map is the symbolization technique we used here. When you first get the GIS data, which details all of the bombing missions, it's literally just a file that contains hundreds of thousands of points that each detail a single bombing mission. Like literally any bombing mission data that exists that has an XY location, it's on this data. And so what that means when you load it into the map, it's literally, it just covers the entire thing in points. And that's not really useful, for one, because you can't see anything under it, it just wouldn't be useful. But number two is that we're not necessarily concerning ourselves with individual bombing runs. What we really want to observe here is the military operations under which these bombing missions were held. And so what's really clever is what we did is when we loaded this data into the map, we changed the symbology of the points to be almost entirely transparent, like seriously like 99% transparent. And what that does is that any individual point is not going to show up But clusters of points, they're going to stack on top of each other, and so they become more opaque. And so with that, you can see these sinuous patterns emerge. These patterns like this, for example, this big trail that's running down the length of the Vietnam coast, that's the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And that was the subject of many bombing runs. And you can see the kinds of places that were being bombed more frequently. And that's the kind of thing that clever symbology can reveal to you when you're making a map. So in addition to that, you can see that we have a bunch of auxiliary information as well about all of these operations. You have a question?
Yeah, I do. So you keep saying, you know, GIS does this. I use GIS to make this,
Sure.
that, and whatever. But I still haven't got a damn clue what the act of doing GIS like actually is. Like, is it just putting stuff on a map and that's it, or is it like a graphical design theory or whatever?
It's both. It's both. It's basically a cross between CAD, like computer aided design, and database management, but all within a context of geography. Like everything is registered spatially to a point in the real world. And so that might not be, if you want, after this presentation, I can like kind of open one of the GIS softwares. I think we have them installed on this computer. Yeah, we do. So I could show you just kind of what it would mean to like put data into the map and kind of work with it. I can show you that afterwards if you want that.
I mean, to horribly boil it down, it's just having a map in front of you and then having the ability to put pins on it.
Kind of, but it's also more about manipulating the stuff that's on the map, which is of course the data that you're working with. Manipulating what?
So that's actually readable?
Yes, that kind of thing. Okay. There's a lot of stuff you can do. Yeah, I can show you that after the meeting. That'd be a good thing to show you guys. But yeah, this is a great example of using auxiliary information to enhance the map. Additionally, we have accompanying charts. For example, this sort of graphic which shows the temporal, how these bombing missions changed over time, which isn't inherently spatial data, but it shows it in a way that this map can't show because it can't really show time on a single snapshot map. Additionally, we have a smaller map here, which kind of boils down the information into hexes, which shows you where each individual bombing missions were occurring across the peninsula. And so you can kind of see bigger hexagons equals more bombing missions, that kind of thing. This map was very difficult to create, but it's probably one of the best examples of what a reference map can be. So in addition to reference maps, we can also talk about thematic maps. I think it's a bad name. Basically, it's just a map that's mapping data. It's representing some quantity and how it varies across space. There are multiple ways of doing thematic maps. There are multiple kinds of thematic maps. One of which is called a choropleth map, which is literally just coloring polygons based on their values. I might have showed this map before, but this is a map I made for my final project in cartography, GIS 402. It's basically a map that details the percentage of land for each Illinois county that's used for growing corn. The reason why I wanted to make this map was because we hear all the time about how Illinois is just a bunch of cornfields, right? And I wanted to quantify that in some way. I wanted to say, well, how much of Illinois is actually cornfields?
A lot.
Yeah, and more importantly, how are those cornfields distributed across space in the state? And so what this map does and what choropleth maps do is the darker the county is, the higher percentage of the land is made up of cornfields. The way I got this data was I downloaded the USDA's agricultural census data for 2017, I believe. It details the number of acres in each county that's used to grow corn, and I just divided that by the total land area of the county. And so that's how I got that percentage. If you're curious, the county with the highest percentage of its land used to grow corn is Sangamon County here. It has, I believe, just under 30% of its land is devoted to cornfields. The county with the least cornfield density is DuPage County up here, right next to Cook County. And what's interesting about this is that the data that I have actually says 0. That's not quite true. There are actually a few cornfields, a few acres of DuPage County that are used for growing corn. However, due to privacy concerns, because there are so few, the USDA did not report that because it would probably reveal too much information about the people who were actually growing it. So even though technically, what? Like what it's saying is because the it's such a small number of people that theoretically anyone who has requisite knowledge of like where that land is, for example, they could use the reported data from the USDA to kind of track down the people who are growing it. And you might not think that might be a privacy concern, but it's just standard practice among censuses is that if there's a potential for data to be used to track down individuals because it's supposed to be completely anonymous, they can't report it. Similar stuff happens with the population census as well. Certain attributes aren't reported at the block level, for example, because they're too specific, and so it might be used to track down and prejudice against people. That's why they can't report it. But yeah, this percentage was functionally zero. Cook County was like 0.5%, so also very small. What's interesting though is that Southern Illinois is also pretty lacking in cornfields, and that's simply because their soil down there by the confluence of all these rivers just isn't quite useful for growing corn. So that's why it's so small.
Kind of interesting to see. I mean, I don't know the geography of Illinois very much, but I live in Missouri, so
Sure.
Missouri really well. But it's kind of interesting to see that there's not a like high percentage along the Mississippi River.
That's what I was thinking too. Of course, there's still a lot of heavy agriculture in this area, as well as on this corridor, which is the Illinois River. But it might just be used for other crops like soybeans, that kind of thing. I probably could do soybeans too. That'd probably be just as interesting.
Well, don't you have to think of crop rotations as well, because they do rotate soybean and corn?
That's very true. The data that I used was from 2017, and so it could be the case that if I were to use data from 2019, that it could be different. I think
Soy is getting more popular.
Exactly. The most recent data at the time that I made this map was 2017, so that's why I used it. Simple as that. That's something to keep in mind is that when you're using GIS data, oftentimes it's not going to be perfect. Go ahead.
So that I understand, and the hurricane one too.
Sure.
Now those two are not least intimidating on the team, but the other ones are really like impossible to make. It's like, how did you make those?
Yeah, I made them.
How did you make them? I'm so confused.
Well, to be clear, that Vietnam map that I made, that was a lab in one of my courses. He detailed how to do it. In fact, when I did the lab, it was actually split over 2 lab periods because it was such just an intense map. It does come to practice, the class that I took was called cartography. It's literally a class about map making. And so you learn about visual hierarchies, you learn about color theory, you learn about what makes a good, meaningful symbol when you're trying to symbolize things. Go ahead.
So I have a hobby of map making too, but not the kind that you're doing.
Sure.
I made maps for like games and stuff for people to play on.
I do the same thing.
And it's really wild that I have learned the same exact stuff you did for an entirely different thing.
I have used ArcGIS, our mapping software, to create D&D maps, like registered with geography and real stuff. It is cool. It's very cool. Yes, it is very cool. Another kind of thematic map that you can make is called a graduated symbol map. It's just another way of representing data and how it varies. Personally, I'm not a fan of graduated symbols. Personally, I think if you use colors, just use them, but I had to use it for the project. So this is a map of the percentage of the state population that is made up of Hispanic/Latino people. And so this reveals quite a predictable spatial pattern, but still an interesting one, which is that obviously closer to the border, you're going to have a higher percentage of that demographic. And the further north you go, generally the smaller that percentage gets, and so you can see that by the colors. It also kind of reveals an interesting trend, which is that even states that may be far away from the border, if they have big demographically diverse urban centers, they are also going to have bigger populations. And so these circles are going to be bigger as well because they have Chicago, all of New Jersey, New York, that kind of thing. That's kind of an interesting map. The last thematic map that I kind of wanted to show you guys is called a dot density map. This is also kind of like a fringe use map. You might think that when I say dot density, it represents like a dot represents a thing, but that's not really what it is. What you're doing is representing a quantity using dots, which is a weird distinction, but it makes sense. Basically, what I did was I mapped population here. Each dot represents 500 people. These are symbolized based on counties. So each county has a number of dots in it based on how many people are in there. And so you can definitely see like the areas that are more rural versus more urban. Here's the Charlotte metropolitan area, and you can see this corridor along I-40 where there are a series of towns that you can see, even though they're not directly symbolized, you can still see them because of the dots. So that's kind of what this kind of map can show. I think that's all just the general maps that I wanted to show you guys. But yeah, basically the purpose of these maps are specifically to represent where things are located across space. But you might also want to know or concern yourself with spatial relationships, where basically you have data that is spatial and you want to draw conclusions about the world with them. And so now I'm going to give you a couple examples of specific GIS analysis that I have done to try and draw conclusions like this. Anthony might roll his eyes at this, but the first example I want to give is tornado probability and tornado density. Basically, if you consider like creating a map of tornado probability, it would probably be a very useful thing to know. You'd be able to know the areas that are at the greatest risk of tornadoes. And so from that, you could make information for decisions related to insurance, public safety, like people could use it for their own personal decisions about where they live, that kind of thing. It turns out creating tornado probability maps are very hard. I'm not really going to get into that. It has a lot to do with statistics and weird stuff. But the key thing to know here is that these maps are derived from maps of tornado density, which is literally just a count of the tornadoes within an area of a location. Simple as that. And so for one of my GIS projects, I decided that I wanted to go from data that just lists tornado locations, and I wanted to create a density map of tornadoes to kind of see, kind of observe which areas of the country have the greatest tornado densities, have the most tornadoes, tornado alley, that kind of thing. And so this is the data that I used. Oh, this is a really blurry map. But basically every cross on this map represents a tornado. This data isn't perfect, and I narrowed it down actually quite a bit from the raw data. The SPC is the one that maintains this database of all the tornadoes that have ever touched down since I think 1953. However, I limited this data quite a bit. First of all, I limited it geographically to the eastern half of the United States, obviously. The western half just had low numbers, and so I didn't want to deal with it. But additionally, this data went back to as far as 1953, and I talked to my professor about it. He simply told us that, we can't really trust tornado reports back then to be fully complete because there's a chance that they might have been missed due to limited technology back in the day. And so I think this data arbitrarily dates back to 1980 is the cutoff that we decided for that. You have a question?
Yeah. So what exactly do they designate a tornado as? Like if there's one tornado, and then but that same circulation drops down again when the elements there, is that called a new one or a different one? Because that happening from the same area of storms can mess up density.
Yes, that is a good point. And that is a kind of point that I wanted to make about this is that this is the data available. I'm not exactly sure how the SPC defines what is a separate tornado versus the same tornado that touches down multiple times. And I don't know if they represent each of those differently in this data. What I do know is that this is the only thematically complete and geographically complete tornado data that exists. And so this is really my only option. And so that's why I used this data. And so that's kind of something that you want to keep in mind when you're doing GIS, is that sometimes you just have to work with the best data available, even if it's not the perfect data. So yeah, I had this data and I wanted to create a map of tornado density, but I want you guys to consider for a second what it means to assign a density value here. Oh, I can't do the, dang it. All right, I guess I'm gonna have to draw on the whiteboard. I'm sorry for people who are watching on the screen. It's really frustrating. Is this dry erase? Okay. Yeah, I wanted to draw on this, but it's
We're
okay.
all in college. I think we all know what density is.
Okay, well, I wanna demonstrate to you a couple problems that come with doing a density calculation.
Would you have the pen?
Hmm?
Would you have the automated pen?
The pen doesn't do it. I have to. I'm gonna do a hack here. Just gonna draw on a screenshot. There we go. That'll work. So I want you guys to imagine what it would take to have to get a count of tornadoes in applications. Let's say each X represents a tornado. Tornadoes here. Obviously, if you wanted to get a density count, what you would do is for each location, you would define an area around it and count the number of tornadoes in there, and then you would do that for each area in the map that you're making. But I want you guys to consider, how big of an area should you choose? For example, if I were to do this area, and I chose a neighborhood this big, well, the density value is 0. But what if I chose one this big? Well, then the density value is 2. What if I chose one this big? Well, then the density value is, it's like 7. How big of a neighborhood should I use? The answer is, there really is no right answer. It's kind of completely arbitrary. The problem is that you're assigning an area-based value that's to a single point, which means that the area that you use is going to impact what value you're going to read. So I talked to my professor about that, and we ended up concluding that the ideal neighborhood size for that geographic region that we were using is going to be 200 kilometers. That's what we decided. However, the other thing that I want you guys to consider, I'm going to erase this so I can draw it a little bit. Oh, good Lord. This will work actually. So imagine that we have all of these tornadoes and we're trying to get a density value at this location. What if we use a neighborhood size that's this big, and let's say this is 200 kilometers. Well, the density value here is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 tornadoes in a 200 kilometer zone. But that doesn't really make sense because this point does not have a tornado associated with it for 200 kilometers. So how can we say that it's that there are 6 tornadoes at this location? The answer is we don't have to. We can use a weighting function to make it so that these tornadoes aren't counted as much. But then that makes the question, well, what weighting function do you use? How should we do that? So I talked to my professor about that, and what we ended up deciding was that is what I should test. I should test the impact of different weighting functions on what this value could be if we were to use that function. And so I decided to try to create 4 different tornado density maps, each using a different weighting function. Detailed here are the different functions and how they vary in a 200 kilometer window, from a value of 1 if the point is right on it, to a value of 0 if it's at the very edge of the zone. And so you can see the differences between how they assign values. And actually, I'm going to go right back here because this is the map these are the maps that I ended up creating. So first of all, qualitatively, what can we observe here? Well, first of all, you can identify where Tornado Alley is, right? It's this area of the country. And that checks out with what we know, is that we know the places that have the highest tornado likelihood, they have the most tornadoes every year, we know that. But what's interesting is that this actually kind of conflicts what the general population knows about Tornado Alley. If you were to ask a layperson where Tornado Alley was, they would probably point to this series of states right here. And they might not point to the states in Dixie Alley here, Mississippi and Alabama, even though they have more tornadoes than any other state in the US.
I think it's funny that there's like a bubble on this
Yeah.
area. I don't get much.
Exactly. So yeah, that's kind of what this map revealed to me, is that I reaffirmed my knowledge that Tornado Alley should be considered this region of the country, even though colloquially, as a general population basis, it's more thought of as this part of the country. So that's just kind of interesting. Go ahead.
As far as like from Texas, like up to like barely touching, like almost to Chicago, but like below it. So it kind of goes more, like what you said, a little bit more.
That's what I was told too, is that whenever I used to have like geography textbooks back in elementary school, it literally might be like, this is Tornado Alley, but that's not really what it is. Go ahead.
So like, Tornado Alley, tornadoes and supercells, they develop where there's not many obstructions, right? Like trees and hills.
Sure.
Because there's that'll like bounce up the energy now, kind of like this a little bit. My words aren't really well today, I'm very tired. But I just noticed that like with the quadratic one, it's like more of the southern states have like more trees than the ones in the west, like western states, I guess. Because like, I don't know if I'm trying to say something.
No, I get what you're saying. So like, obviously the Great Plains are very flat, and so there's not going to be a lot of friction with the winds. What I will say is that trees in general, they just don't impact something as sizable as a supercell very much, and so you can still have tornadoes in that area. Obviously, we didn't know that we had tornadoes in that area. The reason we avoid Dixie Alley is because there's so many trees you can't see. And so that's kind of the thought process there.
That's the other thing, though, with as many trees, it's easier to tell if they'll actually touch down.
That's also true.
Because in, grass-fed Kansas, as flat as can be, there are no trees, it's just fields. And if, let's say there's nothing in the field, or if there's some minor, you don't see the squirrels, you're gonna see the trees knocked over in Mississippi out there.
And that might kind of, and that might kind of bleed into why the tornado density values are so high in those states, because they can be more easily reported after the fact, because you can see their paths more easily. And so that's kind of why I tried to limit the data, so that we would limit the bias that I could have, if that kind of thing didn't happen anyway. But yeah, the main thing is I kind of want you to observe the differences. First of all, look at the different numbers between each of these methods. The quadratic function has by far the biggest tornado density value of 267.9 within 200-kilometer radius. And the reason for that is pretty obvious if you look at the graph. Let me see if we can go back here. Yeah, if you look at this graph here, this quadratic equation, it has really high values pretty much the entire way down to 0. And even 100 kilometers away from the point, we're still assigning a value of 0.75 to any tornado at that location. So what that means is it's going to artificially inflate those numbers, which is why that number is the biggest. Additionally, we can look at the Gaussian function here. Notice how, while the spatial pattern is mostly the same, there's the blobs of red aren't as big on the Gaussian function. It's more, there's like a ring of yellow here on Arkansas. It's more of a local pattern rather than a regional pattern like this. And the reason, if we go back to this graph, is because it assigns really high values at first, but then very quickly drops off. You can see 100 kilometers from the location, it's assigning a value of 0.25 rather than 0.75 that the quadratic is doing. So what that means is that this quadratic function is kind of smoothing out this pattern, whereas the Gaussian, for example, is like kind of making it spikier. And so the question that you might have is, well, which function should you use? The answer is, there's no right answer. It's arbitrary. And so you might make the decision that if you want to observe more regional patterns, you would look at the quadratic function. But if you wanted to observe more local patterns, you could use the Gaussian function. That's kind of the conclusion that I drew from that analysis. So that's an example of analysis that I did to go from tornado touchdown points to density values with an informed procedure, basically. Get out of that. Another example of a analysis that I did. This one is a much simpler than the other one. I wanted to generate new fire district boundaries for McDonough County. I don't know how many of you know this, but when you call 911 for like a fire, for example, the people who respond to your call are determined by who you pay your taxes to. It's all done by tax districts. The reason is because the fire districts are publicly funded people. And so whoever you pay your taxes to, whoever gets funded by those taxes is going to be the one who responds to you. But you might consider that as a drawback because that doesn't necessarily mean that the person who can respond the fastest to you is going to be the one who comes. And so what I wanted to do is I kind of wanted to come up with a way of redrawing McDonough County's fire districts, redrawing these fire districts that prioritize travel time over anything else. And so the way I did that was I set up a road network and I used that as the basis for generating those polygons. When I say road network, you ever use Google Maps? That's really just a sophisticated GIS road network. I basically set up the same thing for McDonough County, although way less sophisticated, to come up with these updated fire district maps. I'm not going to show you that process, but I will show you the final result. These are the new fire districts that I made. They're all labeled. And this following map here shows you the new ones that I created overlaid on top of the old ones. And so you can see, for example, here, this is Macomb Fire District. It only corresponds to the city limits of Macomb, which is based on taxes, obviously. But you can see in the maps that I made, technically, Macomb Fire District is closer on a travel time basis on the roads to a huge portion of central McDonough County, including the northern part of Industry Fire, Good Hope Fire, portions of these fire districts as well. And so you might think, like, if you live right here, you would have to wait for Good Hope all the way up here to travel down here, even though Macomb's fire district is way closer. Now, in real life, these are limited or mitigated by mutual aid agreements, but my opinion is the primary fire district response should be the one that is closest. And so you can see plenty of examples where the colored fire district, which is the text-based one, does not overlap with the ones that I made based on travel time. And so that's something that I would consider, like, you know, if you ever wanted to go to a zoning meeting or something else, and say, hey, I want to change who I pay my taxes to because these people could respond 10 minutes faster, that kind of thing. So that's the kind of idea behind that analysis. And the last example that I want to give you guys is real world uses of GIS. This is stuff that I've done for work and kind of gives you an example of what GIS can be used for in the real world. Yeah, that's not what I'm looking for. Here we go. So the first example, actually, what are these pictures? No, that's not what I'm looking for. Okay. So the first example I want to give is this map. Basically, the story behind this map is that the city of Canton recently annexed a bunch of parcels around Canton Lake. And so the fire department basically wanted an updated map that showed this new annexation. So I made this map for them. It kind of details, you know, where they annexed, which is over here, which parcels they did, that kind of thing, simple map. What's interesting about this, though, is that when I sent this to them, they sent it back and they said, this isn't really what we're looking for. We wanted to see the parcels themselves. I said, oh, okay, my bad. And so I ended up creating a new map for them. This time it details the parcels in much greater detail. It shows this area much more zoomed in, and it kind of shows the fire district as an aside. And so that's an example of how sometimes what you make at first isn't going to be what the person who you're supporting needs. And so you need to change up your map or your analysis or whatever to make sure that it's what they want. But yeah, this is just a very simplistic map. It's kind of ugly, but it's what they wanted. So here's another example. Morgan County right now is redrawing all their fire districts because they are basically in a mess of mutual aid agreements. They just want to make sure that everyone can understand that they're on the same page with who responds to who. And so what Jacksonville Fire District wanted from us is they wanted a paper map, a giant paper map that they could just draw on and just, like, you know, physically annotate which parcels they needed to move to which fire district. And so I made this big 36 by 48 map. And it details the entire fire district, which is like the majority of Morgan County. It has the parcels, so they can literally just go on and draw a map. This one needs to go here. This red one needs to go blue, that kind of thing. So that's going to support that operation down there. That's an example of a map that I've made recently. And then I'm not going to bore you guys too much more about work, but I do want to show you guys a couple of cool web maps that we have made. Here's the health department one that I told you guys about last time. This map, you can find these all at gis.wiu.edu. This map has a point for each restaurant in McDonough County, and they're symbolized based on whether or not they passed their most recent health inspection. Blue means they passed, yellow means they passed with conditions.
Great. You know, you guys have been on the right ones.
Yes, yes, I will. This most recent red one that I've seen is Hometown Cafe. I do like eating there.
Well, you're gonna die.
No. I love that place for sure. The reason they failed most recently is actually, and you can see this here, this is all public information, so we can link to it. But yeah, the reason they failed is actually because of COVID-19 non-compliance. And I can guarantee that they do not. They do not social distance, they do not wear masks at that restaurant. Yes, so that is why they are red. Well, let's see. We also have a red X symbol for any restaurants that have been closed down by the health departments. There are no red X's currently on this map. The most recent one that I know of was this Mexican restaurant. It used to be called El Rancherito. It failed like 3 health inspections in a row, and so they got shut down. Of course, they ended up being bought out by Los Charros, and so now they're doing fine. They passed all their health inspections since then. What?
You look at those tattoos.
Yes, I can do that. Where's that? That's here, right? No,
The other side's square.
there it is.
Okay.
Yeah. I think they've been fine. For those of you who live in the dorms, don't worry. I have literally never seen these dots be anything other than blue. So you're good there.
Yeah, they are super clean.
What's the red one in the square?
I think I've never heard of this restaurant. It's called Kathy's Cafe.
Oh,
Oh, shit, I hate you.
Oh, well,
no, I haven't.
about Chix's?
Oh, well. Yeah, Chicks is good. They're usually good. Chubby's is also usually pretty good.
Well, I walked in there and it smelled horrendous. I'm surprised.
I think Chicks is good. But yeah, I think this is a really fun map. Kind of demonstrates this information in a
What's
cool
that
way.
red all the way up?
This is that one restaurant.
Oh, I see it, that's why every time I go to Walmart, it is sketchy.
Oh no, this is the Super 8. That's the Super 8.
I thought it was like the gyro restaurant that's right there.
It might be, I don't know, but I mean, let me zoom in here. No, that is
Yeah,
that.
that place is bad.
Yeah.
It looks sketchy every time I pass.
I've never been there, but yeah. Also, I want to warn those of you who eat at Wendy's. They're currently yellow.
Oh, yeah, I'm not
Most,
surprised, I was gonna say, I'm not surprised by that, 'cause every time I go there, they're out of like every single thing, and I just don't trust it. I mean,
most of the time when I check this map, they are bright red. Most of the time.
they're red.
Yeah,
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
I'm
That's like the
surprised
worst
they're-
Wendy's I've ever been to.
I'm surprised they're yellow here. I really am. Usually they have failed their health inspections. I don't know how they haven't closed down. But,
Is Yogi Chen yellow?
that is yes.
Oh my
Sure
God,
are.
what? No.
I don't like
So
Yogi
good.
Chen
Come
yellow.
on, I want to get the dirt. Come on.
I prefer sesame here.
You need dirt.
I do want to point out that McDonough County's health department is very stringent. And so a yellow dot doesn't necessarily mean that they're like, yeah, you don't eat there. It just means that
It's like a
they,
sea level.
yeah, because like if you're looking here, like unapproved food sources, like what does that even mean? I don't know. They had one single cross-contamination, thing in their procedures that they inspected, that kind of thing.
So unapproved food source means that like when you sell food, you need to have a license to sell that food. And I'm pretty sure that comes from like, you buy it from somewhere that does not have a license to supply to a
Ah, there you
They
go.
do sell sushi, so.
That
Yeah,
could be-
it's pretty much.
Yeah, just because it has a yellow dot or even a red dot doesn't necessarily mean you should eat there, but yeah, that is public information. You want to make sure that you guys have that available to you.
Is this kind of map available for anywhere else? Because I'd love to get dirt.
I don't know.
Me too.
This was a project specifically commissioned by the health department, and so if your county or town has a GIS division, they might have it. I will say this region of Illinois, to have a dedicated GIS organization that we do is very rare. Usually that's like a big city thing.
I'm from Gobi.
Well, there you go. So they probably do have something like that then. Yeah.
Wait, O'Fallon?
There's an Ocala, Illinois, and then there's an Ocala, Missouri.
Okay.
There's like every state, every city in Illinois, there's one in Missouri. too.
Yeah, same with Iowa. There are a couple other kind of interesting maps too. Here's a big project that I've had the privilege of working on. This is a map of every
That
headstone.
freaks me out.
in-
Every time I pass by that cemetery, especially at night, I'm like, I never look at it.
Yeah, no, this map is literally a database of every single headstone and grave in Oakwood Cemetery. Basically, we literally had to go out and take GPS points and pictures of every single headstone. And of course, we still have to do it because more people are dying, so we have to keep the database updated. But yeah, you can click on literally any of these points and you can see who's buried there, everything, all the information on the stone. What? Yeah, this is the 4th edition, so pretty long ago. But yeah, additionally, we have pictures.
Did you just go around a graveyard to select each stone?
That's literally what we had to do. We had a guy with GPS and we had a guy with a camera. And that's literally what it was.
There's
It
a
took,
headstone that has a dog. That's the only one that I approve of.
I've only been able to, I was on the very tail end of this project, like being finished up, so I only ever took points of like these back here. But yeah, all the yellow ones are veterans, by the
You
way.
can have 4 photos, what you get hammer shots of the stone. and
Well,
labels.
have you seen some of those monuments?
They stand up, they're huge.
Yeah,
I mean, I guess you probably haven't driven that one, or.
Yeah, no, that's right. There's a Jewish cemetery in my town. It's impressive.
some of those things are opulent, like seriously, they're big. Yeah, that was a huge project. So I don't know if any of you know anyone buried here, but in case you do, there's that. Here's one that we made, a very similar map of the Alumni Plaza, except very much at a smaller scale. But what you can do is if you bought one of those bricks in the Alumni Plaza, you can search your name and you can see where it is. Yeah. I think we have a couple of meteorology students who made them. Yep, Devin made one. It's there, so if you ever want to see Devin's name in a brick, you go there.
Is that just do like everything here? Is like I've heard him like a million times.
He's a very active alumnus, which, yeah, good.
Oh, neat. Chicago does have a list of all their inputs.
There you go.
It's not by map.
Yeah, I think they would have to specifically like make a map for it, but yeah.
Yeah, you trees.
WIU trees, it is literally a database of all the trees on WIU's campus. It's literally that simple.
Well, they do have a map.
Yep.
I'm sorry, Sean.
No, you're all good. Why are they not showing up though? I think the map might be broken. Huh? It's the layer list. I hate ArcGIS online. Oh, there, okay, it just took forever to load. My favorite point on this entire thing, if you saw that, look at this big tree here. You might think like, whoa, where's the ginormous like red oak tree on campus? Oh, no, what's really going on here is you measure trees at breast height. You literally stand on a tree and you take a measurement around whatever height that is. But because that tree right here, it kind of splits off into like 10 different trunks. It like at breast height, its diameter is huge because you have to go around the entire thing. So that's why it's symbolized that big.
I need you to look at a specific tree because my mom has been pestering me to figure out which one it was.
Okay, which one is it?
Okay, so go to like, you look where it says South Campus, go to like the western side, like right next to the S, sort of. So like, I think it was somewhere east of Tillman, maybe?
Like here.
Like,
Talking about the
yeah,
one
like-
that's like the.
And like, it has these weird, like, oval sort of fruits, a little bit.
Let's see, we have Tatari and Maple. I don't know anything about trees. My boss, who like really wants us to maintain this map, is like, he was like a arbory major in college or something. So he knows all about this. But yeah, if you ever want to look at an individual tree, there's WIU trees for you. Yeah, I've talked to you guys about the Taylorville tornado maps that we've made. I've talked to you guys about the warming center map that we made, spring 2019 stuff, if you're ever interested in that, and a bunch of other stuff too that we maintain for a bunch of other counties and stuff. But yeah, so that was a basically big old skewing of all, or not all, but a number of the things that I've done with GIS. Just to kind of give you guys an idea of what we can do with it. Does anyone have any questions? Okay.
I feel like I would definitely enjoy it because I love organizing.
It's really cool. I enjoy it. Like I really do enjoy it. And of course, it goes hand in hand with meteorology because meteorology is all about maps. You can't do meteorology without maps. But yeah, if you guys have no other questions, comments, or concerns, then I'll go ahead and end it here. Thank you guys for listening to me ramble. I love talking about GIS. I love doing that. But yeah, enjoy your Thanksgiving break, and we will come back and we'll talk about elections. We'll take nominations for club positions. Yeah, that's all.
I do have a question, I mean, it's just kind of off topic, but like with the one map